Hello.
Hello.
Today we are again with Mr. Waḥīd Azal, Islamic scholar, to talk about the ex-Baha'is and particularly their raping stand on various subjects, particularly the current status of Baha'ism or Baha'i Mafia, if you like. How are you, Mr. Azal?
Very well. How are you?
Thank you. I've got a question. My first question is, Mr. Azal, shunning is the practice of ostracizing the apostate, right? For instance, if you leave a religion, adherents will cut off all interaction with you. Shunning is practiced by highly authoritarian religions like the Baha'i
Yeah.
faith, Baha'i Mafia, Jehovah's Witness, and even Scientology, Ekankar, and serves as a very powerful sanction against any sort of rebellion. Shunning also may be very traumatic for the victim, especially when, he or she has never been encouraged, to form any close relationships outside, the faith. My question is, if the same holds for a group of people usually referred to as the ex-Baha'is, represented primarily and mainly by a certain Erik Stetson. How would you find that? Because these people, in my book, sound quite fishy. And
Oh, yeah.
and this gaslighting, and blame reversal is perpetrated, relentlessly, as if they are still members of the Baha'i Mafia. What
Good
is really
point.
going on here?
Well, this needs to be looked at from a couple of different angles. Let's start here. Let's start with the liberal Baha'is, because the liberal Baha'is are the first stop towards the whole ex-Baha'i milieu. And the liberal
Right.
Baha'is, and this is the group of people that made a martyrology out of the expulsion of Alison Marshall in the year 2000, they very much practice shunning and defamation of people and whatnot. Steve Marshall, Alison Marshall's husband, was very much as nasty, and sometimes nastier than even Susan Manick back in the days of Talk Religion Baha'i. These people practice, they have the same modus operandi of shunning and ostracizing and demonizing and defaming their own critics in the exact same manner as full-blown card-carrying Baha'is in the Haifan Baha'i
Of course,
institutions.
Mr. Azal, to my knowledge, this Marshall couple never disavowed their belief in Baha'u'llah, right?
No, Steve Marshall was never expelled, which is also a very fishy thing in and of itself, because he was far more critical of the USJ and the Baha'i institutions in New Zealand and internationally than Alison Marshall was. They instanced Alison Marshall because of statements that she had made on a couple of these lists. One that was actually administered by Juan Cole, Irfan at umich.edu. But no, they never disavowed Mirza Hossein Ali and Nouri, yet Alison Marshall was expelled for her statements about the USJ. And then, subsequently when I came back to Australia, I made contact with these people, and we had a list for a while with them on Yahoo groups known as Zuhur 19. This is going back about 18, 19 years now. And I subsequently had a falling out with them for a very simple reason. It began over the fact that most of these people that congregated around the Marshalls, and even to some degree Juan Cole, have a very conspicuous Iranophobia and anti-Iranian and Islamophobic and anti-Islamic Anglo-Saxon kind of tack to things. There is a white racism very prevalent with these people. And they deny it, and they try to reverse narrativize and gaslight people who bring this to their attention. But by and large, most of these people were white Anglo-Saxons.
You're suggesting the very same technique of, the Haifan Baha'i.
It is absolute. There is no difference in the modus operandi and the way that these people do things and what the Haifan Baha'i administration they clique the psychology of their cliquing,
demonizing people, bullying people.
Even the psychology and the dynamics of the manner in which these people clique together is very similar to what you find amongst the Haifan Baha'is themselves. And this has been going on for quite a long time. I cut all ties with these people, including with Juan Cole, almost 2 decades now, over this stuff, because there's a lot of dishonesty, both on a personal level and in the greater social dynamic level, and ultimately on an intellectual and spiritual level. Lots of dishonesty. They, on the one hand, they want to have their cake and eat it too. On the other hand, no matter what evidence you bring to these people, that the rot of Baha'ism is at its very core. These people continue with the same tack as they always do. Now, Erik Stetson, is in a kind of a subcategory to all of this. And the subcategory that Erik Stetson is in the following. Erik Stetson first made his public appearance in 2002, claiming to be a Baha'i prophet, as sort of a Baha'i manifestation of God with the name of Mustaghas al-Baha. And he wrote this very, very silly book called The Book of Restoration, which has disappeared from the internet now, but I have a copy of this. Where he basically put forth this claim, and the whole book was a cut and paste from the Kitab Giron. And then sometime after that, very shortly after that, he withdrew that claim, and in the following year, we find Erik Stetson as basically the leading figure and the leading person for the whole exbahai online.
Mr. Azal, my second question revolves around another theme, meaning covenant breaking, and of course it's not quite irrelevant, but going on another thread, what is the correct and meaningful context for the concept of covenant breaking? I want, because over time we can see Ahmad Sohrab, who may have been the earliest observer, to this provision, right, to this technicality. Ahmad Sohrab was shunned away again, and so was the case, as you mentioned, Alison Marshall back in 2002, right?
2000. They expelled her in the year 2000.
Yes. She
just
was
before
also,
the Sydney Olympics. I remember that's when it all happened.
Exactly. And Mirza Ahmad Sohrab, fully accounted the stories about his, expulsion in his book, Broken Silence, right? Yeah. That was published by Universal Publishing back in 1942. And you also touched on the problem with Johan Cole, and what happened to Johan Cole. And because he also had a fallout with the Baha'i administration, and I believe he wants to make it a story of victim, right? He wants to make it a story of victim.
Well, I mean, his falling out was not one-sided at all. But you have to give him credit. Where the credit is due. The man, did bring up a lot of important truths. Now, the problem with Juan Cole is that Juan Cole is very much a part of a subculture that I think is also as equally problematic as the greater subculture of Haifan Bahaism itself. You brought up Sohrab and the whole issue of what constitutes covenant breaking. Covenant breaking in the Haifan Baha'i context, or in the overall Baha'i context, is that whoever disagrees or dissents against the policies of a given authority of each generation is a covenant breaker. It's very similar, this whole reality of covenant breaking in Baha'ism, as the fallouts, like for example, that eminent Bolsheviks would have with the regime in the former USSR, or even in the Islamic Republic of Iran, when you've had these falling outs of eminent figures, from Montazeri to to Mir Hossein Mousavi, Ahmadinejad, and on it goes. These falling outs kind of they follow almost an identical trajectory, because the fundamental issue is that Baha'ism is a completely political religion. And despite their nonsensical doublespeak about being a non-political creed, the internal dynamics of this creed at every stage of its existence has been completely political and politicized in all ways. And so you've had, from generation to generation, beginning with the time of Baha'u'llah himself, all the way to the present, where certain people have disagreed with certain policies, certain approaches, certain interpretations of the head of the creed, and these people, because of their persistence, they have been declared covenant breakers, and the wider community has been encouraged to shun, ostracize these people, which technically is in most under most human rights jurisprudence, is a form of incitement.
Always under the same modus operandi, right?
Always, it's almost exactly the same modus operandi.
For instance, Mr. Azal, they summon up the enrolled Baha'is to investigate the problem of heresy,
Yeah, but see, this is the thing that is quite interesting, is that leadership has been made into worldly leadership has been made into a theological absolute in Baha'ism. Now, you can argue that to some degree other religions have had the same problem, the formal religions, whether we're talking about Roman Catholicism or Islam in many respects. But the thing is that the Baha'is have taken this step on another level. And also the way that this has behaved is very much within a modernist mold. I have made for a very long time, I have made the comparison between the Haifan Baha'i administrative order and the Stalinist systems of the former Eastern Bloc, because they resemble each other and they behave exactly the same, and the way that dissidence formulates out of that system is almost identical, and you can compare the two from one generation to the next. But going back
I believe it carries your comparison.
Yeah.
And analogy carries lots of weight.
Yeah.
Actually. And Mr. Azal, across this trajectory that you just mentioned, we may well come across people like Frederick Glacier, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even Denis McKeown, and many others. But could you specifically touch on and allude certain Erik Stetson and his rise and fall?
Well, his fall would probably be a voluntary thing. I don't think he fell. He just basically walked out of the limelight. Like I mentioned before, the entry of Erik Stetson into the Baha'i cyberspace scene internationally was very suspicious. He came in claiming to be a Baha'i manifestation of God, Mustaqas al-Baha, with this really silly book, which was a cut and paste from the Keyvān. Then all of a sudden this went away, and then he became kind of the central figure of the exbahai scene in cyberspace. So where the liberal Baha'is were siphoning off their more radical membership in these various controlled lists of theirs over to Erik Stetson. And then all of a sudden we have almost the same modus operandi and behavior that you have in virtually all of these Baha'i cyberspace scenes.
How did he come? How did he come in the first place to get in connection with, Unitarian Baha'is? I mean, with Baha'i.
This was at a time when I was in contact with certain members of these people on the internet, and I told them, because Erik Stetson had mentioned to me that he was looking for these people, and I then, I relayed the message back to them that, the Stetson wanted to talk to them, that maybe they should talk to him, so they started to talk to him. And then after some time, I kind of let the matter go, and, we found out that this book came out in 2011, A Lost History of the Baha'i Faith, which, there's a bit of an issue here because, most of the pro-Stetson people in these various ex-Baha'i lists attributed the book, or continued to attribute the book, as being the authorship of Erik Stetson, when it is no such thing whatsoever. The book is actually a compilation of letters and communiques of Mr. Shah Baha'i and other members of that family. Erik Stetson merely wrote a foreword to the book, so the book has a foreword by Erik Stetson, but the book is not by Erik Stetson.
So he did lean on solely the families of Shahullah, right?
And a few other people. I think that he also tried to contact the Shaheeds in the UK as well at some point. I'm not clear about that completely, but I think that may have happened. Yeah.
And was he what kind of person he was? I wonder. Was he, for instance, a scholar bar carrier?
Not at all. Erik Stetson does not have has no scholarly acumen at all. Right. He is a poster boy in many respects, and this is what raised all my flags about him.
Because it's one of the rarest, areas of studies that one might be attracted to.
Sure. And the thing is that these people are not interested in learning the languages, to do a thorough study of the Baha'i and Babi writings in the original languages. So there's no scholarly background. Now, let me put this out there. This is a very important issue here. I have contended for a very long time, and I will continue to say this, that I believe that Mr. Erik Stetson was wheeled out into Baha'i cyberspace at a time when the powers that be were beginning to lose control of the narrative. And so he entered the fray as a form of gatekeeping. Now, in the world of spycraft and espionage, and also the internet, as we found out in the last couple of years, all sides of a discourse are gatekept. So that means that a given authority or power, corporation, government, whatever, attempts to control its own opposition when it cannot bring the opposition back into its fold formally. It will try to control the opposition. So it will acknowledge the existence of an opposition, but it will attempt to control it. And I believe that the entry of Erik Stetson into Baha'i cyberspace was very much at whoever pulls the strings, whether it be the USJ directly or bigger powers, that they brought Erik Stetson as a way to kind of dampen the fires at the time, which was being led by myself and a couple other people. And Erik Stetson was brought forward as a way to control the opposition. So he's a gatekeeper. And we see this in a very interesting light. I have mentioned this before. The thing is that the powers that control Baha'ism, we're talking about the Baha'i mafia or even governments who have interest in this thing, do not wish to see any element of Baha'ism, reverting back to its Iranian Islamic roots. And Erik Stetson was extremely Islamophobic and very Iranophobic. So you would see, these very caustic asides about Islam, and he never made a distinction between Sunni and Shia, and on it goes. And this now extends to this other figure that sort of has succeeded Erik Stetson in that particular role, that being Dale husband. And as I understand it, that he attempted to interrogate you at some point about your beliefs and whether you were a Muslim. Yeah.
And sorry, it was kind of bizarre that these people didn't have real jobs, as if they are being kind of paid, annually by, shall we say, Baha'i Internet Committee.
Or it doesn't necessarily even have to come from them directly. It can come from any other venue that may be directly or indirectly connected to these people. But they are gatekeepers. Erik Stetson was very much a gatekeeper. He, the way I mapped it out is that, whoever is out there controlling this does not want, even the opposition to Baha'ism to take anything but a Anglo-European and specifically an Anglo-American kind of hue. They don't want to know about the Bab. They don't want to know about Islam. They don't want any of these discussions. So there are a very set limit of kind of discussions and the parameters of these discussions within these exbahai lists that are then repeatedly churned out and repeated over and over and over again. And if someone, goes beyond that or goes into another area of that, they have a problem.
Always churned my stomach, because to me he's more of a troll.
Yeah, he is.
About, along with his former buddy Pat Kohli, I believe they could make a couple. They could make a very good match.
Pat Kohli disappeared. I mean, this is after a friend of mine.
What happened to him?
Oh, he disappeared. I mean, we found out that he was working for an arms contracting company out on the East Coast in the United States. And this was at a time when me and a friend of mine who was a lawyer in the United States had found that information all in the public domain, connecting the Baha'is to the private arms contracting industry. And that these people were working in various facets of it. Prominently being the Yaḥyāʻī family, another Sangisari family in the United States that actually owned a company that was a major West Coast arms contractor. And then Pat Kohli himself was a systems analyst for another arms contracting company. So these people are in the U.S. arms industry. Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Azal, did the term the Unitarian Baha'is, right? Was it coined by Erik Stetson?
No, it wasn't. I mean, look, the followers of Muhammad Ali called themselves Muwahhidun, which would translate as to Unitarians. Now, I'm not completely sure at which point Erik Stetson found his way into the Unitarian Universalist.
So are you suggesting they have unwittingly accepted the term of Unitarian Baha'i? I mean, the followers of Muhammad Ali?
No. It's not unwittingly. They chose the term itself. It's a little different than that. But because of Erik Stetson's association with this pseudo religion called the Unitarian Universalists in the United States, and it's a very American phenomenon. It's a church without God or prophets or scripture. They have kind of inserted themselves into that whole scene and claimed the Muwahhidun Baha'is, the followers and the family of Muhammad Ali, as one of their own.
And what were the sincere intentions of this Muwahhidun or Universalist?
Well, not Universalist. They never used that term Universalist. They just used the term Unitarian. The original one.
Unitarian. Unitarian. I correct myself.
Yeah, for that one would have to go, for example, to the Will and Testament of Muhammad Ali himself, which Bionic.com first put out there for full public view. This is going back about 18 years ago now. And the original Unitarian Universalist is a very democratized version of Baha'ism, where Muhammad Ali basically disputed this concept of infallibility that Abdul Baha Abbas Effendi was pushing at the time. So, the way that they presented themselves was a lot more mellower version of the Baha'ism that we know today.
Right. And finally, I believe the thorough and correct context of this discussion could not be taken note of, without studying the same modus operandi, exercised and employed by people like Erik Stetson, such as vilification, right? Such as scapegoat, demonizing, scapegoating, shunning, banishing.
Yeah, exactly. And Erik Stetson was doing that himself to people like myself and a few other people on the list exbahai that he ran from about 2003 to about 2009 or 10 or so. So he was operating within the exact same kind of operation and modus operandi as the Haifans and these liberal hacks, etc.
In parallel, perhaps wittingly or unwittingly.
Well, who knows? Wittingly, I believe that this guy was parachuted in deliberately, and that he was well aware and fully aware of the fact that he was to be a gatekeeper, a parachuted gatekeeper. He served his role and then went on to do other things. And ultimately, he also dropped this whole online Unitarian Baha'i thing himself. He had a list for a while. I think it's still even running.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this parachuting style resulted in his book didn't go down with the followers, of the Baha'i faith, from other branches, neither, with the Haifan Baha'is. So, what's a big deal?
Well, I mean, he played his hand and it didn't play well, and that was that, and he walked away from the whole thing, which tells you the sincerity of the man is zero. He doesn't stand for anything, which is very typical of middle class, privileged white Americans, liberal white Americans.
Public speaking, you leave right now. Stetson has got a protégé, meaning Mr. Dale Husband.
Dale Husband is trying to walk in Erik Stetson's footsteps, but Dale Husband doesn't have the savvy of Erik Stetson. Erik Stetson was a fox, and very, very crafty corporate and political player was Erik Stetson. Dale Husband doesn't have that kind of sophistication. He's a real simpleton, this guy. Whereas with Erik Stetson, you had to watch him closely to see that the guy was a racist. Mr. Dale Husband wears his racism on his sleeve, practically.
Right. And the kind of wisdom, because the kind of wisdom in this sect has been dissimulated, under their watch. And I'm not sure where they are heading to.
Well, let me, since this came up in another context, not a lot of people are aware of the fact that all the properties in Haifa, Israel, belonging to the Baha'is are actually registered under the name of National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. Now, you take that, isolate that, and I would argue that the Baha'i, since the internet, the major focal point of the internet is within the United States, that the American establishment, we don't even have to talk about the American government because the establishment is something else, but the interests, the plutocracy, the greater plutocracy of the United States that the Baha'is play with, does not wish any form of opposition to Baha'ism to formulate in a nativist context. They don't want Iranians dissenting against this thing. People who are Iranians who are articulate in both languages.
That's right.
They want to contain this within a strictly Anglo-American context. And this is why they wheel in people like Erik Stetson, then later an idiot like Dale Husband, for that very purpose. Because these people then can gatekeep and can pursue these policies of shunning and dissension and kicking people off of lists, and then they can use other people to do that for them, which is also the kind of stuff that the mainstream Baha'is themselves have always done. But this is a very contained, this is a very controlled discourse all over the internet. And we're not just talking about lists controlled by outright Haifan Baha'i cultists, but also the opposition lists themselves are being controlled. And what is very disturbing, let me finish this point, is that you have people who claim to be in Iran, although that's up for debate. But people who are claim to be in Iran or claim to be somewhere in the Middle East who are cooperating with this. So they're helping these Anglo-American ex-Baha'i liberals basically control the discourse in cyberspace. And I'm specifically talking about that ex-Baha'i list on Reddit, where you have this very dubious character by the name of Salman Wilson, who is not even a Baha'i and knows very little about this thing. Who is very trigger happy with anyone, and as he was with me, throwing the people off that list and cutting them off from that list. But yet people like Dale Husband, this woman, ex-Christian Baha'i, ex-Baha'i Christian, people who are basically promoting either the doctrine of the evangelical church or the Unitarian Universalists, all localized in the United States, are fine with these people, or they will allow. Let me finish. Hold on. Let me finish. Or they will allow absolutely obnoxious trolls, Baha'i trolls like Scott Hakala, to run roughshod over that list and all of its membership for over a year and a half, not doing anything about this guy, although the guy was breaking every single rule of that list as well as Reddit. But yet, if someone like myself, and similarly, throws an issue, throws a curveball on that list or whatnot, they will immediately act and do exactly what all of these Baha'i lists do. They will throw these people off the list and cut them off.
Right. And, at this point, I'm going to do a little bit of, background checking, if you please.
Sure.
There's a name, Paul Hammond. Does it ring a bell?
Very much so. Yes, it does.
And please do yield an explanation because this guy was behind most of the cyber attacks and slanders against you.
Yes, he was
very active.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the end.
First of all, was he, as he claimed, was he really the president of the Baha'i Society at the Keele University?
Well,
he
could have been, but let's start at the end of this guy's career. In 2013, we learned that this individual was arrested in the UK. Paul Andrew Hammond was arrested for sending a text message, a text message with sexual content to the mother of a 12, 13-year-old girl who was a student of his at a school that he was teaching at. So he was booked on basically, solicitation of a minor misconduct. Which basically means that the guy is a pedophile. And this is one thing that one of the accusations that I had made against this individual. This individual was extremely malevolent, and he was everywhere. And there was a time period from about 2003 to about 2008 that all this guy would do all over the internet was to try to counter anything I was saying, anything I was doing, my presence on any list, not just even Baha'i ones, even non-Baha'i ones, and basically this guy was working for the Baha'i Internet Agency. He claimed he was not a Baha'i, but yet he had claimed to be the president of the Baha'i Society at this university in the UK, where he obtained a degree in mathematics. And on the story went. One of my friends, who was doing background checking on this guy, claimed that this guy may have been associated with the local police department at one point. Then we found out that this may be not true. He claimed to be working in a pub, but someone who works in a pub doesn't have all this time on their hands to be online to counter everywhere, be posting, hundreds of messages a day to counter what I'm doing and what some of my other friends. And this guy was a real piece of work. This fits the profile of the kind of organized harassment, which some have termed as gangstalking, that is very prevalent now on the internet, in the milieu of the internet, But this individual, Paul Andrew Hammond, was tasked with basically as the attack dog against myself.
He was tasked, yeah.
Until he got what was coming from.
You amplified, in the podcast about the Baha'i Mafia, section 2, and we can further a speculation and strengthen our points by saying that Paul Hammond can also be categorized under, the associates or muhibs, right?
Yeah, and that's basically what he was operating under. Now, I would contend that this man was paid, and there's no question about it. Because, even if you're a muhib, you're a distant affiliate, you don't have the kind of time that this individual had all the time on message boards, and especially on Usenet and on Wikipedia and on Yahoo groups that he did. And claim to have a job at the same time. I mean, I would post a message, it wouldn't take a couple of minutes.
And for a while, he was running the Guild of Baha'i Student Society in Liverpool.
This is what he claims. This is what we can. We were not able to verify that information.
Verify his account, right.
But we did verify the fact that he was arrested and booked on charges of pedophilia.
And what is he doing now?
Who knows?
Right, so evaporated into air. Right? Because this is too ridiculous.
And they did it again. The Baha'is did it again. And they did it again beginning in 2016. They wheeled out this individual who had disappeared from Facebook for a long time, this guy named Nate Abookire. This was at a time that there was a solid organization of people coming together to combat the fascism, of Alexander Dugin and his networks on social media. Immediately, this Nate Abookire was brought back. Suddenly, he disappeared for 2 years. He claims that he was at the theological seminary. And for 2.5 years, this guy was relentless, in his attacks all over Facebook. But, he was, I have good friends, and we countered this guy's insanity until, he coughed it up himself that he was, he had been a Baha'i. But we already knew that, and we already knew that based on the fact that he was intimately close as a friend to this guy called Arthur Logan Decker III, who is this card-carrying Baha'i that is a member of literally hundreds of thousands of lists on Facebook that have anything to do with religion or any kind of spirituality or any kind of, politics with a neo-traditionalist angle, etc. And then he had another friend with him that was encouraging him. Likewise, this guy called Denis Giron, who works for the United Nations in New York City in the United Nations building. He's part of some the building administration in that place. And yet these people were online throughout 2016, 17, and most of 18, consistently on an attack just against myself. And this, I don't believe was merely just the Dugan networks, although they were definitely involved. But this was also the participation of the Baha'is, and they themselves then confessed the fact on this defamatory blog that this individual by the fake name of Akira Kalishnikov, which subsequently turned out to be Nate Abookire, put out on me all over the internet. And I have, left that blog there as evidence of the fact that the Baha'is and the Russian fascists were collaborating.
Right. And speaking of, the attacking against you, and your family, one can confidently come to the conclusion that disclosing these facts can reveal that the main reason lies behind the assumption that these activities, are committed just to incapacitate and to silence people like you,
But they have failed. But they have failed.
Practically, yes, practically failed, but nevertheless they carried on, right?
Yeah, they carried on, and then,
But they failed, yes.
Yeah, but they failed, and we keep on going on,
both
and we beat them.
Both in theory and practice, that they failed. They failed because they couldn't fulfill their prophecies.
And in the meantime, they have given me enough information, documented information, that if I ever walk into a court of law with these people directly, I will nail them to that wall of the court worse than Ahmad Sohrab ever did. And they know this. And
Yes.
so, they spread out their activities
So
on
you
other
asserted that
continents.
right for yourself, right?
Yeah, I would, I would.
asserted that right.
Absolutely. They have given me so much information. I have so much documentation on these people and what they have done, connecting them to, to the Baha'i Internet Agency or to other Baha'i individuals. That if the day should come that this information is revealed to a courtroom, I don't think they will ever come out of that courtroom with their reputations intact anywhere.
Not at all. Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you very much indeed for
Thank you.
being with us. Hopefully, we'll discuss in the next podcast. We'll be discussing the rise and fall of some of the prominent Baha'i scholars, and I wish you a very good day, very good holidays.
Goodbye.